video is the first of two about audience analysis. This video is about intercultural communication. In this video, we will be looking at some of the components of intercultural communication, including the context of intercultural communication, the components of successful intercultural communication, the application of it in different situations, and nonverbal communication in intercultural contexts. Understanding the basics of intercultural communication is essential if you wish to become an effective communicator in general. Look at these statistics. At our university in 2009, for example, 45% of the graduating class self-identified as a visible minority. Compare this with the proportion across Canada. 22% of students across Canada in 2009 self-identified as a visible minority. At our university, we have a very high number of students who fall into this category. In broader terms, there are predictions that by 2031, almost one-third of Canadians will be a visible minority, many of whom will have grown up outside of Canada. So when you're interacting or communicating with someone who is from a culture other than your own, be aware of the context. It really does not matter what culture you come from. When you're faced with working or communicating with someone who does not share your cultural background, you need to be conscious of both the differences between your two cultures, but also where the cultures overlap. Try to recognize the differences and adjust your communication methods to meet the needs of the other. To become a successful intercultural communicator, remember that all cultures are complex. There is a widespread tendency to ignore or reduce diversity when we look at other cultures. It is often easy to talk about French culture, Arab culture, Japanese culture, or African culture. But such cultures, if it's truly possible to identify them, are so complex and vast that it's easy to use stereotypes to describe them. So although there is something recognizably British about the British and Japanese about the Japanese, it is extremely important to recognize the diversity within those cultures. If we don't, we risk saying absolutely everyone in a particular culture is the same, and this culture can be described with only a small set of characteristics. Think about it. Have you heard or made the following sorts of statements? The British are cold and unsmiling. The British don't care about their parents. They always put their mothers and fathers in nursing homes. Americans are loud and noisy and ask stupid questions about our country. Americans are friendly. I met a nice couple once, then they asked me to visit them. The point here is that you cannot judge a whole country based on interactions with two people. How about this one? Indian people always lie. They never tell the truth. Here, directness is considered rude, so if you ask a direct question and you do not get a direct answer back, what conclusion do you jump to? Do you assume that the other person is hiding something, when that may not be the case? How about another one? The Germans are so efficient and organized. Are all Germans really this way? The Spanish are so friendly and relaxed, but they never get any work done. Here, the concept of time is different from what North Americans think about time. The Chinese are so noisy, they're always asking personal questions. Western women have no morals. Muslim women have no freedom. And I could go on. How should we react to such statements? Do we react with anger, with explanation, with understanding? Should we ignore such half-truths, stereotypic judgments, and oversimplifications? Before taking any of those actions, consider what can be learned from each of the statements. It is impossible to remove all forms of stereotypes, but if we are aware of what we do when we stereotype, it will help us to expand our interpretation of an individual and help us to recognize the diversity and complexity of what we see. Successful intercultural communicators, therefore, approach new situations and people with an open mind, aware that his or her preferred values are influenced by culture. If you are to become a successful intercultural communicator, you will be sensitive to your own verbal and nonverbal behavior, as well as sensitive to the differences among individuals within a culture. Now, if you think back to the communication model we discussed at the beginning of the course, remember that both communicators have underlying needs, self-concepts, roles, knowledge, attitudes, and emotions, things that you may be barely conscious of in yourself, never mind in the other communicator. At the same time, there is all the noise that threatens clear communication. As we've discussed, all of these things affect communication. With intercultural communication, it may be harder to estimate or anticipate the effects of these things if you do not have a strong understanding of the other person's cultural background. Remember, too, not to jump to conclusions about the other person's background. For example, a person of Japanese descent whose family has lived in Canada for 100 years or so may no longer be influenced by the traditions of Japanese culture. They may be more Canadian, whatever that may be, than Japanese. If you look up the definition of culture, you will find definitions related to biology as well as the social and intellectual aspects of a society. How culture is defined will vary, but in brief it refers to those things like music, literature, art, as well as what we call popular culture, such as television, film, video games, and so on. But it also refers to the beliefs and customs of racial, religious, or social groups. In other words, culture has many definitions. No matter how it is defined, it shapes who we are. It shapes our self-identity, our values, our beliefs, and how we do things on a daily basis. As a result, no matter what we do or where we work, an awareness of cultural differences is important. In the workplace, employees and clients and bosses may all have very different cultural backgrounds. In addition, with globalization, many companies are multinational and have offices around the world. Remember, too, that diversity is not only about race and culture. It is also about gender, social class, religion, age, sexual orientation, and physical ability. Becoming a strong communicator means not only being aware of and sensitive to this diversity, but also to adjust your communication style and content to best suit your audience. So cultures are generally considered to fall somewhere along a continuum between high context and low context cultures. In high context cultures, most of the information is inferred from the context of a message. Little information is explicitly conveyed. In high context cultures, people tend to prefer indirectness, politeness, and ambiguity, and to rely more on nonverbal signs than words to communicate. Therefore, things like oral agreements are usually more binding than written agreements. Cultures that are considered to be high context include the Latin American countries, Japan, Middle Eastern countries, and so on. In low context cultures, the context of the situation is less important. As a result, most information is explicitly spelled out. Compare Japanese and Arabic peoples who are from high context cultures with German and North American people who are from cultures considered to be low context. Low context cultures prefer directness, confrontation, and clarity. People rely much more on words than nonverbal communication and consider written agreements as being more binding than oral agreements. So cultures that are generally considered low context include Canada, the United States, Britain, Scandinavia, Germany, and so on. So one's culture shapes one's values, beliefs, and practices. These in turn affect our responses to people and situations. So when you are working or interacting with other people, you need to remember that different cultures have different views of the concepts of fairness, success, competition, and social status. In terms of writing, there are a few basic guidelines to follow. In general, of course, always be aware that your audience comes from different backgrounds and will have different expectations. Remember that most cultures are more formal than we are in Canada. When you are writing, avoid using first names and never use only the first name. You should use titles instead. For example, you would use doctor for medical doctors, professors, and the like. If a person doesn't have a formal designation like doctor, use Mr. as in Mr. Smith or Ms. Never use Mrs. or Miss. If you're not sure whether the person is a man or a woman, you can use the first and last name together. Dear Jane Smith. Why would you never use Mrs. or Miss? Well, they are outdated forms of address and they're outdated because it doesn't matter if a woman is married or not. Indeed, most of the time you will not know whether Miss or Mrs. is correct, and if you guess incorrectly, you could insult the recipient. In formal writing, you should also never use contractions. This goes for any formal writing at work or even in essays at school. Similarly, never use slang or sports metaphors. Slang, idioms, and sports metaphors are all culturally based. For example, if someone says that he hit the presentation out of the park, what does he mean? In this case, the person means not only that the presentation was successful, but that it was very successful. It is a baseball reference to hitting a home run, but if you're from a country where you've never played or even seen baseball, the statement will not make any sense. Slang is not only culturally based, but also generational. For example, the first time I heard the word sick used to mean something that was good, I was confused. You know, sick to me means something bad. Slang changes regularly and is based in popular culture. When you're writing for international audiences, always write in English unless you are fluent in the reader's language. You want to make sure that your intended meaning is absolutely clear, and you can only do that in your own language. If the recipients need a translation, allow them to use someone they know and trust. In most cases, you will want to buffer any negative messages and to make any requests indirect. Remember that for many cultures, being too abrupt and too direct can be seen as insulting. As you are composing your message, consider that the benefits that motivate Canadian audiences may not be the same for other people. You need to develop the ability to anticipate what your reader will understand from your message by trying to put yourself in his or her shoes. But you must be sure you are doing so without being trapped by stereotypes. Finally, when writing dates, the international standard is to spell out the name of the month and put the whole date in the order of day, month, year. Nonverbal communication is important in intercultural communication because our signals, such as head nods, smiles, meeting another person's eyes or not meeting them, and so on, are all affected by culture. This topic is covered in more detail in the interpersonal communication video, but for the moment, be aware that communication without words is also affected by culture. Nonverbal communication can be misinterpreted just as easily as words. Therefore, it is important to be conscious of the signals, such as smiles and gestures, that one sends and receives. So in this video, we discussed the various components of intercultural communication. You should be able to apply the concepts discussed here in your own communications with people from cultural backgrounds that are different from your own. Many of the concepts discussed here will be revisited in other modules. Thank you for listening.